They gave us the alphabet, not a version of it, not a precursor that would need centuries of refinement before it became recognizable. The Phoenician alphabet, 22 consonants carved into stone and clay and scratched onto papyrus, is the direct ancestor of Greek, Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, and through those languages, virtually every writing system used in the Western world today. Every word you have ever read, every document ever written in a European or Middle Eastern language, traces its form back to a Semitic trading people who lived on the coast of what is now Lebanon 3,000 years ago. They also gave us Carthage, the city that would become Rome's greatest rival, that would produce Hannibal, that would fight 3 wars against the Roman Republic before being utterly destroyed in 146 BCE, was founded by Phoenician colonists from the city of Tyre in approximately 814 BCE. Before Rome was an empire, before it was even a significant republic, the Phoenician world stretched from the Levantine coast across the Mediterranean to North Africa, Spain, and possibly beyond. Ancient sources describe Phoenician sailors venturing past the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar, into the Atlantic. Some accounts place them off the coast of Britain. One text, disputed but persistent, describes a Phoenician fleet commissioned by an Egyptian pharaoh circumnavigating the entire African continent. We know all of this from other people's records, from Greek writers who admired and envied them, from Roman historians who defeated and destroyed them, from Egyptian texts that traded with them. The Phoenicians themselves left no extended literary record that has survived. Their cities were conquered, their archives burned, their language gradually replaced by Aramaic, and then Greek, and then Arabic. What they were, who they were, and what happened to them became, over centuries, a question that written sources alone could not fully answer. In 2022, the DNA finally spoke for them. To understand what the ancient DNA revealed about the Phoenicians, you first need to understand what made them so historically significant and so historically elusive. The Phoenicians were not a single unified state. They were a collection of city-states along the Levantine coast, the narrow strip of land between the Lebanon Mountains and the Mediterranean Sea. Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, Berytus, which is modern Beirut. Each city was politically independent, with its own kings and its own civic institutions. What united them was language, a shared Northwest Semitic tongue closely related to the Hebrew spoken by their neighbors to the south, and trade. The Phoenicians were the great maritime merchants of the ancient Mediterranean world. Beginning in the 9th century BCE and reaching their peak influence in the 8th and 7th centuries, they established trading colonies and permanent settlements across the Mediterranean at an extraordinary rate. Carthage in North Africa, Cadiz in Spain, then called Gadir, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Western Europe. Palermo in Sicily, Cagliari in Sardinia, Malta, Cyprus. The Western Mediterranean coastline is dotted with cities whose foundations are Phoenician, even when their later history is Roman or Arab or Spanish. This expansion raises the genetic question that the 2022 study set out to answer. When the Phoenicians founded a colony, did they bring large numbers of people from the Levantine homeland? Or did they establish a small trading outpost that mixed quickly with local populations? Did the Phoenician diaspora leave a genetically detectable mark on the populations of the modern Mediterranean? And if so, how much? The 2022 study that addressed these questions was published in the American Journal of Human Genetics, led by a team of researchers including Claude Dumais-Serhal and Pierre Zalua, working with ancient skeletal material from multiple Phoenician period sites across the Mediterranean world. The study analyzed ancient genomes from individuals buried at sites in Lebanon, Sardinia, Spain, and North Africa, spanning the peak Phoenician expansion period from roughly 800 to 200 BCE. The results produced a picture of Phoenician genetic history that was both illuminating and surprising. On the Levantine homeland side, the ancient Phoenicians of Lebanon showed a genetic profile continuous with the broader Canaanite population of the ancient southern Levant. Their ancestry traced primarily to the same Neolithic farming populations from the ancient Near East that had populated the Levant for thousands of years, with some Bronze Age steppe-related admixture and some contribution from northeastern Africa. In this respect, the Phoenicians were genetically what their geography would predict. They were the people of the ancient Levantine coast, shaped by the same population history as their neighbors in ancient Israel, Jordan, and Syria. The more striking findings came from the colonial sites. The ancient individuals from the Phoenician colonies in Sardinia, Spain, and North Africa showed a different pattern from what a simple model of Levantine colonization would have predicted. Rather than showing a clean signal of Levantine ancestry transplanted to a new location, the colonial individuals showed varying degrees of admixture with local populations. In Sardinia, Phoenician period individuals showed substantial Sardinian indigenous ancestry alongside the Levantine component. In Spain, the admixture with Iberian populations was detectable within just a few generations of the founding of a colony. This is important because it tells us something fundamental about how the Phoenician expansion actually worked. The Phoenicians were not replacing local populations. They were not founding ethnically pure Levantine enclaves. They were integrating. Within a generation or two of establishing a colony, Phoenician men were marrying local women, or Phoenician women were marrying local men, and the result was a community that was genetically mixed from very early in its history. The discovery that carries the greatest weight for understanding the Phoenician legacy, however, is not what the ancient DNA shows about the colonial individuals. It is what happens when the ancient Phoenician genetic signal is traced into the modern populations of the Mediterranean. The 2022 study found that the Levantine Phoenician ancestry component is detectable in modern populations across the entire Mediterranean basin, not uniformly, but in a pattern that correlates with the historical distribution of Phoenician colonial activity. Modern Lebanese populations show the highest continuity with ancient Phoenician genomes, which is consistent with the continuity of population in the Levantine homeland. But the signal also appears, at measurable proportions, in modern Maltese, Sardinian, Tunisian, and Spanish populations. Malta is a particularly striking case. The Maltese show a genetic profile that includes a proportion of Levantine ancestry that is higher than their geographic position in the central Mediterranean would suggest from the movement of other ancient populations. The Phoenician component in modern Maltese genetics is one of the clearest signals in the study of Mediterranean population history. Malta, the tiny island that sits at the geographic center of the Phoenician trading world, carries in its population the genetic legacy of the people who first made it a significant settlement. In Tunisia, the ancient site of Carthage, the Levantine ancestry signal is similarly detectable in modern Tunisian populations, a genetic echo of the Phoenician colonists who founded what would become the most powerful city in the Western Mediterranean for several centuries. The Carthaginian population did not simply disappear when Rome destroyed the city in 146 BCE. They were absorbed into the broader population of Roman North Africa, diluted by subsequent migrations, but never entirely erased. The genome, as always, preserved what the historical record could not. There is a dimension of the Phoenician genetic story that connects to one of the most emotionally resonant questions in modern identity politics: the question of who are the modern Lebanese. Lebanon is a country whose population is divided by religion, by sect, by political alignment, in ways that have produced repeated cycles of violence across the 20th and 21st centuries. The question of what unifies Lebanese people beneath these divisions has been answered in different ways by different political and cultural traditions. Some emphasize Arab identity, others emphasize a pre-Arab, pre-Islamic Phoenician heritage. The Maronite Christian tradition in particular has long claimed a Phoenician identity that distinguishes Lebanese Christians from the broader Arab world. The ancient DNA complicates both the unifying and the divisive versions of this story. Modern Lebanese people, regardless of sect or religion, show a high degree of genetic continuity with ancient Levantine populations, including the ancient Phoenicians. The genetic heritage of Phoenicia is not the exclusive property of any Lebanese religious or sectarian group. It is distributed across the population with a consistency that the sectarian divisions of modern Lebanon do not predict. Lebanese Christians, Lebanese Sunni Muslims, Lebanese Shia Muslims, Lebanese Druze, all show high levels of ancestry from the ancient Levantine population that was the Phoenician homeland. In this specific genetic sense, the Phoenicians belong to all of them equally. The genome does not honor the borders that history and religion have drawn within the Lebanese population. It records only the deeper continuity that binds them to the same ancient coastal people. Stand for a moment on the coast at Tyre, in southern Lebanon. where ancient Phoenician harbor installations are still partly visible beneath the Mediterranean water. The city that founded Carthage, that produced the traders who carried glass and purple dye to the corners of the ancient world, that contributed the alphabet to human civilization, is now a city of roughly 60,000 people in a country divided by conflicts that the ancient Phoenicians could not have imagined. The people of Tyre today carry, in their cells, a genetic continuity with the people who lived here 3,000 years ago that is deeper than the continuity carried by most populations in the world. They are not the same people. 3,000 years of conquest, conversion, linguistic shift, and population movement separate them from the purple traders of the ancient Mediterranean. But the biological thread runs unbroken. The Phoenicians are gone as a named people, as a political entity, as a cultural tradition with living practitioners. Their language is extinct, their religion is gone. The purple dye they produced from the murex sea snail, the color so expensive that only kings could afford it, has not been commercially produced for 15 centuries. The great city of Carthage is an archaeological site outside Tunis. But the alphabet persists. The cities persist, remade and renamed but standing on Phoenician foundations. And the genome persists, distributed across the modern populations of the Mediterranean, in proportions that the 2022 study made visible for the first time. The Phoenicians were never what we thought, because for most of recorded history, we thought about them only through what other people said about them, through the admiring Greek descriptions of their seamanship and their craftwork, through the hostile Roman accounts of Carthage and Hannibal, through the sparse biblical references to the people of Tyre and Sidon who supplied cedar for Solomon's temple. What the DNA gives us is something that written sources could never provide, a direct view of who they were biologically, how they moved across the Mediterranean, how they mixed with the people they encountered, and what they left behind in the populations of a world that has largely forgotten their name, but still writes in the letters they invented. The Phoenicians wrote the first lines of the story of the Western world's written language, and in the genome of every modern Mediterranean person who carries their ancestry, they are still writing, still present, still here, in the molecules, doing quietly what they always did best, moving across the water, making connections, leaving something of themselves in every place they touched. The alphabet they invented did not stay in Lebanon. It traveled west with their ships, was borrowed by the Greeks who modified it to represent vowels as well as consonants, was adapted by the Romans into the script that eventually became the letters you are reading now. Every document in every European language, every inscription on every monument, every book ever printed in the Western tradition, carries within its letter forms the memory of a Semitic trading people who needed a practical system for recording commercial transactions 3,000 years ago. They built the infrastructure of literacy, and then, like so many of the most consequential contributors to the human story, they were largely forgotten by the civilization their invention made possible. History is not only what is recorded. Sometimes the deepest history is what persists in the body after the records are gone. The Phoenicians knew how to make things last. 3,000 years later, it turns out they were right.